All right, good morning and welcome everybody. For those who don't know me, my name is Zaina Al-Shaib. I'm the Director of Communications here at the Middle East Institute. Thank you for joining today's discussion. Our briefing today is on the record and we'll be discussing President al-Shara's trip to Washington, D.C. Syrian President Ahmed al-Sharaa was on a first-of-its-kind landmark trip to the White House earlier this week. The trip resulted in Syria officially joining the global coalition against ISIS, but a lot more was discussed during this visit. To help us break it all down, we're joined by Ambassador Ryan Crocker. Ambassador Crocker is MEI's Distinguished Diplomatic Fellow and is a former career diplomat with the U.S. Foreign Service. His previous appointments included U.S. Ambassador to Syria, Iraq, Pakistan, Kuwait, Afghanistan, and Lebanon. And we're also joined by al-Zayat. Wael is the CEO of Emgage Foundation and is an associate fellow at MEI. He happens to be joining us from Damascus. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
As usual, we will have a Q&A segment during the session. So if you'd like to ask a question, please use the raise hand function in Zoom and we'll select you, unmute you, and you could direct your question to one or both of our panelists. You can also type your questions in the chat box here on Zoom. All right, let's get started. Ambassador Crocker, this is the third in-person meeting between President Donald Trump and President Ahmed al-Sharaa. How would you assess the visit?
I think it was an astounding success on a number of levels. Symbolically, of course, the president of Syria, of late a card-carrying member of al-Qaeda in the Oval Office, warmly greeted and supported by President Trump. It was also, I think, a success in the sense that it is another example of the Trump approach to foreign policy. He had campaigned on a retrenchment of a U.S. withdrawing behind its own borders and letting the world take care of itself. He has instead been very, very activist. And I think this is another example. His initial meeting with President al-Sharaa in Saudi Arabia, which, as I understand it, went against the advice of his closest counselors. It was a very bold move, and he's doubled down on it. And I think that there was substance as well. Clearly, the waiver of the Caesar Act sanctions for an additional 6 months, the formal joining of Syria to the anti-ISIS coalition, and apparently the agreement on presence of the U.S. military at Meza Air Base outside of Damascus, all fairly substantial. But the real tests are yet to come.
Absolutely. And we will dive into all of these details shortly. But for now, let's go to Wael. Wael, you're in Damascus, as we mentioned. How are Syrians on the ground viewing such a visit?
Yeah, indeed, and thanks for having me on. And it's an honor to be with Ambassador Crocker. They're extremely proud and generally happy seeing their leader and their country being honored in such a manner in the United States and at the White House. And it's a moment of joy. And there are also, it's matched with expectations that hopefully this continued improvements of relationships and the lifting of essentially all sanctions and designations except of the Caesars Act combined with the recent waivers would lead to tangible improvements in daily lives here. So as the excitement is going up, so are the expectations for how they may positively impact the economic activities and daily life here.
Absolutely. Ambassador Crocker, how significant is this realignment that we're witnessing in the Middle East right now? I mean, Syria has been isolated for quite a few decades. So the fact that right now they're aligning, al-Sharaa at least, and his interim government are aligning themselves with the United States, how significant is that?
Potentially, it is hugely significant. In my view, Sharaa has one unreconcilable enemy, and that is al-Qaeda. The blood between and Islamic State. I mean, the blood spilled between them, I think, can never be bridged. And it is important that we recognize it, that the neighbors of Syria recognize it, and that we also recognize another very significant realignment here, which is the split between Syria and Iran and Hezbollah that Shah's accession represents. Overnight, literally, Syria went from being Iran's most valued ally in the region to a foe. And more tangibly, it cut the supply lines between Iran and Hezbollah at a time when Hezbollah had suffered a major defeat at the hands of Israel and Iran likewise. So this is a hinge point potentially in regional history. The challenges, again, are immense inside Syria and in the region. It's very important that we support this new order for geopolitical and reasons of regional strategy, but we also have to be realistic. Just like Syrian expectations have to be kept tethered to reality, so do our own. This is not going to be an instant overnight transformation into a stable institutional democracy. It doesn't happen that way. We've got to be realistic in our expectations of what this new order in Syria can do, but taking into cognizance the enormous seismic shift this brings to the region at a critical time.
Speaking of expectations, and you've visited both Syria and Lebanon last month, and you've written an insightful trip report that is now posted on MEI's website, and I will share it in the chat box. What were your main takeaways?
I traveled on behalf of UNHCR, the UN's refugee agency, and we visited refugee populations in both Lebanon and in Syria. The magnitude of this ongoing refugee crisis cannot be overstated. In Syria in particular, really over half the population was either driven out of the country or internally displaced. And Wael has seen this up close and personally as well. The Damascus suburbs, home to a vast number of internally displaced and refugees, there are no homes to return to. They're just fields of rubble. And the management of refugee and internally displaced expectations is going to be huge. We met with a group of returned refugee women, and when I asked them, knowing what they know now about reality in Syria, would they have left Lebanon? And frankly, a majority said they would have stayed put if they'd known how bad it was in Syria. And this is both a humanitarian crisis and a political crisis, potentially. If over half your population is literally dispossessed and sees no hope for a better future, it gets at Wael's point on expectations being very high. That is the root of future instability, both social and political. And the United States, of course, has played a major role in assistance to refugees, but unfortunately, the Trump administration has cut its contribution to UNHCR from $2 billion last year to less than $1 billion this year. And that has a global impact, but clearly it is affecting UNHCR's ability to assist returning refugees, new refugees from Alawi areas into Lebanon, and internally displaced. So I would hope that as a result of this visit, the U.S. will relook its contribution to UNHCR's efforts in Syria and in Lebanon.
Absolutely. And I mean, 90% of the Syrian population still lives in poverty. Those numbers have not changed as far as we know. Wael, part of the meeting between Trump and al-Sharaa focused on attracting American investment in Syria. We've been hearing the interim government saying in various in various occasions that Syria has attracted nearly $28 billion in investment since the fall of the Assad regime. Is that translating into a tangible success on the ground, a change in people's daily lives?
Yeah. The answer is mixed. As the ambassador just mentioned, large number of people are still without homes. There's about 2.2 million Syrians living in tents right now inside of the country. That's an astronomical number if you really think about it. I was just out. I'm staying here in the old city in Beit al-Wali. For those who know, this is one of the most beautiful old homes here in Damascus that's been converted into a boutique hotel. Uh, you know, um, Spectacularly beautiful. Just a few miles out of here is the suburb of Jobar, where I went for a drive, and it is Dresden after World War II. It's Hiroshima. It's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of apartment blocks that are simple shells of their former selves and just rubble everywhere. It's really just disconcerting and surreal to walk from there back to the bustling city center and know that both realities exist in Syria. The investments were very welcome and showed, I think, the agility of the new government in attracting such commitments and the goodwill, I think, and the excitement of potential investors in the Gulf, in other parts of the world. But the government, I think, is struggling in identifying the right agencies and entities that would manage these different tenders. There's confusion regarding who's really in charge of implementation or the final decision making. And look, these are growing pains. This is to be expected. I mean, I love that we're highlighting this issue versus something much more sinister right now on the streets, but still a challenge. I think it's going to be a big challenge, particularly for small to medium-sized enterprise in Syria, which is really going to be the main engine for economic development here. The big announcements are major infrastructure projects that are going to take years, if not a decade, like the Damascus subway, for example, or airport rehabilitation. And the government is going to need to figure out how to expedite and to facilitate these investments, and also how to conduct financial transactions with banks that are very risk averse in spite of the suspension of Caesar sanctions and other sanctions on the country. Western banks, American banks right now are simply not establishing correspondence relationships with their Syrian counterparts. So money is just not flowing in large enough quantities that are required for capital investments. And so there's a feeling here of a little bit of frustration, of concern, really, that if things don't turn around, that incredible goodwill, and it's still there, by the way, that President al-Sharaa and his team have received from largely most of the Syrian people, not all, will start to go away. And they're working at it. For example, they just announced that all investments, particularly from the outside, need to go through a single agency, the Higher Investment Commission or Committee. And so they're hoping to kind of facilitate and expedite these processes. But then the financial transactions piece is still going to be a hurdle they have to overcome. There are some creative ways, I can assure you. But that's why, and I know we're going to get to it, lifting the Caesars Act for good by Congress, repealing it for good is, I think, from my observations here, is still a requirement.
Absolutely. Ambassador Crocker, following the summit on Monday, a 6-month suspension of some of the 2019 sanctions on Syria was announced. Those sanctions are commonly known as the Caesar Act, which is what we just talked about. The relief has exemptions, excluding some transactions with Russia and Iran. Will that be enough to change the dynamic on the ground in terms of economic growth?
I don't know if it will be enough, but it is an essential prerequisite. You're just not going to see major Western investment, and I would say even regional investment from private entities on the basis of waivers to the act alone. It will require full repeal. And this will be a big lift. I think in the good news department, it is an issue that has bipartisanship, both in opposition and in support. Uh, Supporters include Senators Jeanne Shaheen, a prominent Democrat, and Joni Ernst, a prominent Republican. Joe Wilson, a senior member of the House, a Republican, is strongly in favor of repeal. So I think it is doable. It will be a major lift. There are a lot of reservations in Congress about the overall intention and direction that President Shara is taking, but this is an issue that crosses party lines. And I would hope that we can put our rancorous partisanship behind us, at least on this one issue, at least for the moment, and look to the future, which I think the repeal of the Caesar Act would be a fundamental building block for a future stable Syria.
Inshallah, we will. All right, let's go to a question from Peter. Peter, I will unmute you.
Hi, Ryan, my old colleague at the National War College. I'm not sure the enthusiasm of all the Syrian people is quite so widespread. The Kurds, for example, are apprehensive that they're going to be abandoned, that they won't be able to retain the autonomy they've had or the system that they've set up, gender equality and the like. Of course, Druze and Alawites and Christians have been subject to attacks by HTS. And then there's also the related question of the victims of the Al-Qaeda and ISIS. There are people around Sharaa who clearly were involved in major crimes, including enslavement of Yazidi girls and rape of them. So my question is, did any of this treatment of the minorities come up during the Trump visit? And should we simply say we don't care about the crimes that were committed against, for example, Yazidi girls who were kidnapped, enslaved, and raped?
Ambassador Crocker, we can start with you and then we'll go to Wael.
Peter, it's good to hear your voice. It's been a long time. Look, let's start with the Kurds, because that, in terms of the internal and regional dynamics, I think presents a particularly grave threat to Syria's future stability. We had the agreement between Mazloum and Shara back in March, but implementation has been painfully slow. And, the issue, for example, of integration of Kurdish forces into the Syrian military remains at a deadlock. I would hope here that the Syrians on both sides of the line could avail themselves of counsel from Iraq. Peter, you know this better than anyone. The dynamics between the Kurdish regional government in the north of Iraq and the Baghdad central government, certainly not without dissent and difficulty, but the two sides have avoided major conflict. And I would hope that that could serve as a model for a long-term understanding in Syria. It is essential. And here the regional countries play a role. Clearly, Turkey has an interest in this, and I thought it telling that the meeting between President Shara and President Trump was joined by the Turkish foreign minister. And then there was a trilateral subsequently between Marco Rubio and the Turkish and Syrian foreign ministers. So the role that Turkey plays and our influence over Turkey toward a reasonable settlement with the Kurds and the central government is going to be essential to Syria's long-term stability. With respect to the other minorities, I have no insight into what was said in the Oval Office, but there was reference to comments on the need for protection of minorities subsequently. I was recently in Lebanon, and I know that Walid Jumblat, the preeminent Druze leader of the region, was both concerned over the violence in Sueda, but also remains generally supportive of al-Sharaa as the last best hope for a unified Syria that will protect all of its people. So again, the challenges are immense, but I think there is a way forward. It will depend on U.S. leadership, as was the case in Iraq. A different dynamic, but still, I think the U.S. role will be key, both internally and in the region.
Absolutely. Wael?
Yeah, I would add that the government released the findings of a committee that was established by the president regarding the events on the coast that killed around 1,400 people. And they were names that were named from the security services that were referred for further investigations or prosecution. Certainly, a lot more needs to happen on that to shed light in terms of any structural or systemic issues that need to be addressed, as well as more of the broader issue of accountability in Syria. There has been no formal transitional justice mechanism that has been announced, to my knowledge, and what types of judicial systems, whether it is a Syrian, a hybrid, or an international body. I doubt they'll accept an international body. But to assure all victims of violence, particularly those who suffered at the hands of the Assad regime, which were the overwhelming number of victims of what happened here in Syria, but any groups, including those who may have been harmed by elements directly or indirectly tied to the current government. But according to a lot of folks I speak to, there's a sense that that's needed. And in fact, the government risks a continuation of the trends we've seen, whether on the coast or in the south, and God forbid in the north, whereby people may take matters into their own hands. My assessment, this is my personal assessment, is what we saw on the coast and in Sueda. In fact, while the government seemed to have misstepped, they ended up having to actually play the role of a defender of those communities because of rising public anger. I cannot overemphasize the level of anger that still remains and the resentment among largely the Sunni Arab population of Syria regarding what happened to them here in Syria at the hands of this regime and its backers, which were backed primarily by some members of those communities. And the fear here is that people would take matters into their own hands, exact revenge. And so I think it behooves the government not only to address any abuses by its own members, but to provide a path forward to ease these pressures that are always exploited, right, and weaponized whenever future episodes of instigations against government forces or members of the security services. For me, that's something that we should watch out for. And I would hope the U.S. government would press for it, though personally, again, I really don't see the Trump administration doing that, though I think it is needed.
Which brings me to my next question. Ambassador Crocker, Congress is taking a hard line on Syria's sanctions. Senators Graham and Van Hollen introduced an amendment to the 2026 defense budget, allowing the sanctions to be suspended, but only under strict conditions. And those conditions involve security, human rights, and regional relations, particularly with Israel. Can al-Sharaa deliver? Does he have the ability to?
I think we've got to be careful of overreaching in the name of good causes, and understanding the reality of Syria, its past as well as its present, because those will definitely influence the future, is key to this. Syria is not going to be transformed overnight into a stable, representative democracy governed by a respected rule of law. It just isn't going to happen. We can be and should be influential, particularly on human rights. And if not for the moral issues, which may not be particularly persuasive with this government, this administration, at least to recognize the chronic instability that human rights abuses and persecution of minorities can create. for a future stable Syria. But again, we've got to be realistic, and this has to be encouraged. Clearly, if events tend in the wrong direction, should the regime turn against its minority populations, should it pick a fight with the Kurds, there is always the recourse of reimposing sanctions. But to condition them on the ideal may, in fact, be a block to achieving what may be real. So, I would favor patience on the part of the administration. I would favor an ongoing diplomatic dialogue. I understand that the Syrian embassy in Washington is reopening. Unfortunately, the American embassy in Damascus remains closed. We badly need an on-the-ground diplomatic presence, both to monitor and to shape conditions in Syria, but we've got to do it through a prism of realism.
Absolutely. Well, do you see Congress and the White House on a collision course when it comes to Syria, particularly on Syria's sanctions?
I don't think so. I think the question is just how clean is the repeal going to be, and what kind of rollback or snapback elements it will have, which I just don't think it really would have anything that is legislated, perhaps something that would enable Congress to express its concerns should Syria backtrack on some of its commitments. Look, this is a Republican-led Congress, and Trump is the president. I would find it very hard to believe that the president and his envoy, Tom Barrack, would not be able to get a Republican House, in this case, to ultimately support this. I personally would be very surprised. And we saw the chair of the House Foreign Relations Committee, Brian Mast, meet with Sharaa, put out what was, kind of a terse, positive, short statement following their meeting that they're both warriors and support defeating Daesh. I do hope American politicians have something else more to say about Middle Easterners after they meet with them. But that aside, even Brian Mast, who's a hardliner on this issue, seems to be coming around. The Syrian community has been engaging him and lobbying him quite a lot for the last few weeks and months, perhaps. I really want to stress again that walking the streets of Damascus here is really a miraculous thing. I never imagined that I would be able to do that. And if you had asked me, someone who is Syrian American, worked on the Syria file for a long time at the State Department and after, that I would be able to do what I'm doing right now, I would have thought you were crazy. If you asked me, how would the Syrian people finally remove Assad, I would have said with a lot more blood and destruction, including in Damascus. And the fact that, relatively speaking, this has not happened does not mean that there are no challenges that should be addressed, including on the inclusivity, accountability, representation of the current government and its efficiency. These are fair questions, but it's dealing with a Herculean rebuilding effort, a traumatized society. And, we've not talked about our Israeli friends who have bombed Syria more than 500 times and taken yet more land and are putting a lot of pressure on the society here, I think with their misguided support of some of the Druze in the South. And so when we talk about reconciliation and minority rights, Syria needs a lot of help, particularly on that issue, because how that's resolved, I think, is signaling to the YPG and the Kurds in the north how, what kind of deal they should wait out for. And I don't think that's going to work out well for anybody. And so, but again, it's very important to just put it in context. We're less than a year from the liberation of Syria from Assad, and I encourage folks to place our expectations in that context.
Absolutely. Let's go to Mary Boyce. Mary is our board member who has also recently returned from Syria. She was on a delegation trip with the Middle East Institute. Mary?
Thank you, Senya, and thank you, gentlemen. She says I was in Syria last week, and I agree that President al-Sharaa and his colleagues have a very attractive narrative, and I wish them every success. But without stating my own view, I think we should be more understanding of many U.S. taxpayers who are tired of watching countries destroy and bomb themselves into the Stone Age, and then are frustrated that the U.S. isn't sending billions and billions of hard-earned dollars. I may or may not hold that view, but I think it's something we need to better acknowledge and understand. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Ambassador Crocker?
Well, we've spoken of the Caesar Act and its possible repeal. The real significance of that is the difference it would make in private sector investment.
Right.
That it would make Syria bankable again. That to provide the funds on an investment basis for the reconstruction of Syria. So this is not a vehicle for United States largesse. It's a means of enabling the private sector to do what the private sector does best, to find bankable investments and execute them with the knowledge that their investment is protected. In terms of the humanitarian argument, I get it. You know, I'm from a part of the country that has not done well economically, that resents, this is Eastern Washington, Northern Idaho, that resents the establishment, both the Republican and the Democratic establishment, for not looking after them better. And that, of course, is a national trend that has led to, among other things, the rise of President Trump. So I get the argument. That said, we are still the shining city on the hill, as Ronald Reagan put it in his final speech as president. We stand for a better life for others when that is possible, when it makes sense. And I would suggest that it makes sense now. And again, if you don't like the moral argument for increasing assistance to returning refugees and internally displaced, and again, that is about half of the Syrian population, well, I would hope that you would listen to the national security argument, that an investment in a better life for these refugees is an investment in a more stable future Syria. And we have seen what an unstable Syria and a malign Syria can do. It led to the rise of Hezbollah, the repeated wars with Lebanon, the bombing of the U.S. Embassy in Beirut, the bombing of the Marine barracks in Beirut, an investment in a stable future Syria is an investment in a more stable region, and that can potentially save American lives down the line. So I think there's a very solid national security argument for support, especially for the internally displaced and the refugee population of Syria.
Thank you, Ambassador. An excellent answer and a reminder of why your service on behalf of our country is so widely praised and applauded. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a question from Ambassador Jeffrey Feltman. He says, good to see you both, Ryan and Wael. Can you share the Syrian reactions to the parliamentary elections, disappointing results for women and minorities? Any update on the 70 MPs to be selected by President al-Sharaa? And thanks for your comments today. Wael, can we start with you?
Yeah, I've been here for 5 days. Not a single person has spoken about it. So it really hasn't received a lot of attention, though it's happened a bit ago already. And I don't think the president has seated the remaining 70 or so folks. So it doesn't seem people are upset or happy. Again, I want to bring it back to the focus on jobs, cost of living, which is increasing, energy provision, electricity, and economic recovery, daily lives, rebuilding schools and hospitals and having access to a better quality of life. Now, I'm certain if, and I haven't done that on this trip, if I were to go and hang out with a bit more of some of the intellectual class, they would want to debate, the composition of this parliament. Though I did ask folks in my meetings about their sense of governance and representation. Are they expecting a more representative democracy? Do they want the presidential elections to come earlier? How should they proceed with the rewriting of the final constitution? And here you see really a wide range of opinions. Some folks are wishing that the elections would come sooner and that there is a even more representation, particularly like in the cabinet, for example. Currently, right now, there's only one woman, our friend Hind Kabawat, who we used to know from the opposition days, and she's a member of the Christian community. But others, and it's interesting, even folks who say, look, I support democracy. However, Syria needs a transition and needs a strong leader. I hear this a lot. Needs a strong leader to guide it through this period. Perhaps only somebody like President al-Sharaa can get us through this period, can deal with the external actors and the internal actors and the different groups. He has control over his group and hopefully at least the respect of his, those who oppose him. And there is, an emerging cult of personality here of him. He is hugely popular. Again, not by everyone, certainly not by those in the SDF areas or in parts of the South or even maybe on the coast, or even within the Sunni community. But I think there was a polling that happened a few months ago, and he was polling in the high 80s, I think. And so, and people keep going back to, they just want stability, an end to the fighting, to the destruction, and a chance to rebuild. And it seems to me, and I can't quantify this, but a lot of Syrians are willing to give them a number of years at least to help get them back on track.
Ambassador Crocker, anything to add on the parliamentary elections?
I would agree with Wael that, and I was there fairly soon after the elections. It was not exactly the narrative that was gripping the folks that I was talking to. They were worried about the roof over their head and where the next meal was coming from. That said, I think they are significant, and what Sharaa does with the 70 odd that he is to appoint is going to be a very important signal within Syria and outside, especially to the United States. He will be under a lot of pressure on making those appointments, and I think it is important that our voice be heard on the need to establish the principle of adequate minority representation. It's unfortunate that these elections took place without Kurdish participation in the areas they control. And I think it's important that there be voices heard in that parliament who may not agree with everything President Sharaa is trying to do. This will be, again, an important signal of the overall nature of this new regime in Syria, its respect for its minority populations, its respect for dissenting views. So while it may not be an issue that grips the country right now, it is one that should grip us and other supporters of a strong and stable Syria of the future. And again, and Jeffrey, no one knows this better than you, this is where retail diplomacy comes in. The quiet day-to-day contact from Arabic-speaking diplomats on the ground who know Syria and who know the region with this new administration to influence events such as the structure of this new parliament. And that, again, is something we don't have and we badly need.
Absolutely. We have a question from John Corbin. John wants to know, aside from sanctions, what challenges does Sharaa face in consolidating control over tools of security, violence to prevent clashes across the country? How does the way the media portrays these clashes reflect the reality on the ground? Wael, can we start with you?
Yeah. Obviously the Syrian Democratic Forces are an armed and Western trained militia, fighting force in the north outside of his control, supported by the United States. So that's an obstacle in terms of exerting Syrian sovereignty over all of its territories. Part of the Druze community is armed and backed by Israel. And they are also essentially have cut off parts of Sweden from government, not only forces, but institutions and activities. And that's a challenge for him as well. Within, I think the Alawite communities, there are some former regime elements. It's hard to really tell how large the, Alawite insurgents are at this point. But I don't think they pose as much of a problem as the SDF or potentially, an Israeli-backed Druze force. And within, I think, his own apparatus, I think he's putting together what is essentially former militias, whether they were belonging to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham or other groups like the Syrian National Army that was backed by Turkey or local militias. And here I think it gets challenging. And in terms of having a cohesive fighting force, a structure that is really there for the betterment of the country and its national defense or internal security, to combat, corruption and cronyism within that force, and to, limit abuses that we do see happen whenever these episodes flare up. And that's, I think, probably in the near term, I would say his biggest challenge is just getting that piece right, because he's going to keep getting challenged by those groups I mentioned. It's going to keep happening. And it's how he reacts and responds to it, and how his fighting force responds to it is going to be the ultimate test of the quality of the governance that he's leading. And that is really something that the Syrians talk about openly, by the way, is we know it's going to keep happening, and we just can't let them draw us into making mistakes or having massive massacres take place, because then they know that that's what, whether they were internal or external, the opponents of the new government want to see. And in terms of the framing, all too often the episodes that we have seen are instigated by folks who belong to some of those groups, whether it is former regime elements on the coast or folks who were aligned with Hikmet al-Hijri, the spiritual leader in the South. And it's how the government responded that received the attention and the all too often social media condemnation. I can tell you there is a very large social media army out there. Some have been traced back to Russia, Iran, and Israel, that seizes upon those opportunities, which makes it that much more important for the government here to get ahead of it, to prioritize civil peace and national reconciliation, to be patient, strategically patient, not to, be too hasty in how it responds, even when it is not the offender, because all too often that's who everyone who's going to respond to. In football, it's not the person who throws the first punch that's usually gets the penalty. It's the one who responds.
Ambassador Crocker, what do you see as Shara's biggest challenges?
All of the above. Wael did a great job of enumerating the internal challenges. The full implementation of the March 10 agreement with the Kurds is going to be crucial for Syria's long-term future. We have a direct interest in that. We have had a military presence in the Kurdish regions for a number of years now in the fight against ISIS. And again, that should draw the Kurds and the Sharaa administration closer together. They have a common enemy. It's also why, again, support for UNHCR is so important. UNHCR has taken over management of the al-Hol camp in the north, the largest concentration of suspected al-Qaeda fighters, former al-Qaeda fighters, Islamic State, and their families. This promises a more rational management of the camp and a better liaison with Damascus. The challenges are immense, and they cannot be overcome with military force one way or the other. In Lebanon last month, I visited concentrations of refugees in the north, largely Alawi, who had fled because of violence against them. These were not pillars of the old regime by any means. These were, average people living average lives until the overthrow of the regime, and they had some pretty awful videos of what they endured and the family members they lost in that spasm of violence. So, again, the new administration in Syria has an obligation to gain control over the security of the country. That's fundamental for any nation. But they have an equally important obligation to do so in a manner that does not foster further bloodshed and build a new set of grievances. And again, that is a matter for the Syrian people themselves. We can be influential. Where we can be really influential is dealing with centrifugal forces from the outside. During the violence in Soweto, I understand that we were effective in intervening with Israel to prevent outright direct Israeli support for the Druze community. I think that is important. A Druze rump state somehow allied with Israel would be a formula for a national disaster in Syria. It could bring down the whole edifice. And similarly, the Turks have played a centrifugal role with their animosity towards the Kurds in general and towards the PKK and the YPG in particular. There too, we can be influential. We are, in that sense, still the indispensable nation, I think, both with Syria's neighbors, primarily Turkey and Israel, but also with Iraq and in Beirut as well, where those governments need to understand better than they do now that al-Sharaa, with his anti-ISIS orientation, his anti-al-Qaeda orientation, and in particular, for the case of Lebanon, his anti-Hezbollah orientation, represents an opportunity. I'm afraid that both Baghdad and Beirut are still mired in thinking of the old ways and the old regime, and they need to shift their optic a bit. We can be critical in that process, but we've got to be engaged to do it.
But are we viewed as a stable long-term partner in today's Syria?
Well, that depends on what we do next. Again, I commend President Trump for a bold and potentially transformational shift in U.S. policy towards Syria. But as we've been saying throughout this program, now the hard work comes. Will we stay engaged in a meaningful way in support of a new Syrian order that is stable, secure, and respects all of its people? Will we play a role in the region to give that new government and that new order its best possible chance? Or will we lose interest and drift off somewhere else? And our record of staying the course in the region and elsewhere is not spectacularly good. This is a chance to demonstrate that we will stay with the president's initiative, that we will, as he put it at the time of the meeting on Monday, that he will do everything possible to help this new administration in Syria succeed. Well, this is where when the camera lights go off and the hard work begins, that we will have to demonstrate through our actions and our engagement on the ground that we are a reliable partner.
Absolutely.
If I'm to add to that, Zaina, the Syrian government here, and I think it's also, just because they're very proud people, but they mean it. They keep saying we don't need handouts. We don't even want humanitarian assistance, though I think they do need it. They say we want to be able to do investments and we want to work. The Syrian people are very hardworking. They're very entrepreneurial. The Syrian diaspora is very large and has a lot of resources and technical capacity. These people here can rebuild themselves. Really, I truly believe it. but they have to have a chance. That comes with ending the Caesar sanctions and just normalizing the relationship with this country, particularly the financial relationship. Current tariffs on Syria are 55%, by the way. That they got to go down. And I'm sure the President Trump would expect something in return. But really, Syria is a country that could balloon to 30 million people on the Eastern Mediterranean with access to gas and oil once they resolve their issues with the SDF, borders important countries at the crossroads of Europe, Africa, and Asia. This could be a powerhouse in the next 10 to 20 years, not maybe Germany, but on par with some Eastern European countries. It has an agricultural base, a knowledgeable and educated population. And again, the diaspora piece is quite important. When I was here in December, there were already plans for a IT and tech conference here in Damascus, which actually took place 2 times, led by Syrian techies from Silicon Valley. About 1,000 people showed up here, including how to use AI for not only recovery, but to support innovative homegrown technologies. And so it's really fascinating what's happening here. And for those who maybe are not fans of, foreign aid or assistance, I think investing in Syria to invest in itself is actually going to be a good return for those who do that. I think there's money to be made in Syria. In fact, every part of the economy here is ripe for not only rebuilding, but growth.
Absolutely. Let's go to Barbara Slavin. Barbara, I think
Sure.
you're on.
Yeah, can you hear me? Thank you so much for doing this. It's very helpful, Ryan. It's great to see you. I think I remember visiting you in Damascus when you were ambassador there back before all of this transpired. I have a couple questions. One is about the drug trade, Captagon. How much of a handle is the government really getting on this? You see reports that it's kind of localized now, but still going on, and that people need the income from drug smuggling somehow to get by. Also, just curious about Shara's contacts with the U.S. prior to all of this. There have been some indications that he actually has been in touch with the Americans, maybe through the Turks for some years, maybe since his break with al-Qaeda. And lastly, Hezbollah. Have they been able to stop the rearmament of Hezbollah through parts of Syria? Because again, you see indications from time to time that folks are still trying to use those old routes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Crocker.
I'll defer on the Captagon trade, except to say that as we know through our own painful experience in this country, where there's a market, there will be a source. So eradicating it is going to be incredibly difficult, but to be ensure that it is no longer a state-run enterprise as it was during the Assad years, I think is crucial. With regard to Hezbollah and arms smuggling, my best guess is that it's still continuing, not with any complicity from the Sharaa administration, but simply because they don't have a full handle on border security, internal communications, and related issues. It's important that they increase their vigilance and in particular their capacity, and that again is an area in which we can potentially play a role. Again, it requires a sustained on-the-ground diplomacy to figure out the problems and then figure out how we can usefully help address them. But I think that is both in terms of the Captagon trade and Hezbollah. That is where an on-the-ground presence by the U.S. can both improve our body of knowledge and offer some useful means of interdicting these supplies. The Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, for example, has vast expertise in matters relating to the international drug trade, including Captagon. I would like to see a DEA presence in Damascus, working with the Syrian administration to get at this problem. First, to identify it in detail, and then second, to figure out how we can usefully help them address it. With regard to contacts between President Shada and the U.S. prior to December, I've seen the same reports that you have, Barbara. I believe they were there, but even if I knew it, I could not address it in this forum.
Thank you.
Before we go to Wael for his part of the answer, I do want to mention, Barbara, that we did a whole webinar on Captagon in Syria. I will send you the link after this webinar. All right, Wael.
On the question of coordination between Shara and the U.S., you know, it's pretty clear that there was coordination, as evident by the targeting of both Al-Qaeda and ISIS cells that continues to this day by both sides inside of areas, first in Idlib, that were under the control of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and now in Syria. All of Syria that is under control of the new interim government. Just recently, I think the Syrian government detained 12 ISIS operatives. It did coincide with a visit to Washington. And you know, every now and then you see a targeted attack against certain groups. On the Captagon, again, just in October, I believe a very large number of pills, I forgot how many millions, were seized by the Syrian authorities. And so we've went from them exporting them to now seizing them. So that's great. But neighboring countries still report large quantities of shipments that are seized. Lebanon and criminal, you know, gangs on the border are involved. Jordan is very concerned about this issue, and they continue to seize them. If you try to drive between Syria and Jordan, expect long delays because they will inspect every inch of your car. And so it's still a problem. They're certainly trying to address it. And I agree with the ambassador. I think that's where the capacity building, technical support, advising, assist on that. And yes, dare I say, some funding would go a long way. And I think it'll be to the benefit of the region.
Syria has announced that it is joining the global coalition against ISIS, but officials have clarified that they are not joining Operation Inherent Resolve, which is the US-led military mission. How much of a difference do you think Syria's entry into the coalition will make on the ground? And do you think Syria might eventually become part of OIR? Ambassador Crocker, we can start with you.
I think the political symbolism of formally joining the coalition is important in and of itself. And I would hope that that would also imply that Syria will be sharing even more of its intelligence assets of who is where. Again, we, as Wael points out, we do have a significant history of coordination with Shara well before December of last year in targeting ISIS cells. And I think that there's every reason to expect that effort will be redoubled. Frankly, I would not have expected, nor would I necessarily have welcomed an announcement of Syria's military participation in the coalition, because that could have led to a confrontation with the Kurds. We are not at that point, unfortunately, in Kurdish regime relations, where I think coordinated military action against anyone is a possibility. That is going to require some political progress that has not yet been made. But I think their formal participation and the avenues that opens for expanded intelligence sharing and targeting are themselves significant.
Absolutely. Wael, anything to add?
No, just to really emphasize the miracle that's happened here. I mean, you have a former designated terrorist organization by the United States with a bounty on his head, and a group that's also designated now a member of a counter-terrorism global coalition led by the United States. I think books have to be rewritten about what just happened here in Syria on many issues, from CT to, you know, political Islam and global insurgencies and so on. And so it's really something to watch. And the expectations here really are mostly about how all of this will improve the daily lives of people.
Absolutely. Let's go to Dr. Zahir Sahlul for a final question.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you, Zaina, and everyone. I have three comments. One of them is about the Captagon, and I think Wael mentioned this, but the problem in Syria with Captagon, that it's very addictive. And I think there is a lot of attention that is focused on the national security issues and the impact of Captagon trade on other countries, but not the impact of Captagon on the Syrian people. In a study that we've done in MediGlobal, about 25% of young men have some type of addiction to Captagon and other drugs also, which are more dangerous. So I think we need to pay more attention to this. The second issue is the misreading of the room, if I can call it, that President al-Sharaa and the new administration maybe will interpret the red carpeting in the White House and other places, that they are successful in all policies and not paying more attention to the disgruntling that is happening inside Syria, related to economy mostly, and the fact that prices are high, the bread is high, the cooking gas price is high, and the electricity taxes are affecting most people. So I think this is the major issue that will be need to be dealt with than political issues. So these are, my comments, and I hope that both Wael and Ambassador Crocker can respond to these two issues. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Wael, you want to?
I agree. I think in every response I gave, I emphasized the importance of addressing the economic situation on Syria and improving the daily lives of people. It's the economy and people just being able to live a dignified life here.
Ambassador Crocker, any concluding thoughts?
I think the way I would conclude this from my point of view would be to quote again President Trump on Monday. We will do everything we can to make Syria succeed. May it be so.
All right, we've reached the end of today's webinar. Thank you to our audience for the great questions, and a huge thank you to our speakers, Ambassador Ryan Crocker and Wael al-Zayat, for their time and valuable insights. I hope you enjoyed today's session, and we'll see you next time.